Hi, I'm Scott Stewart, the CEO of Stewart-Peterson. I just wanted to take a few minutes to expand a little bit on the article that I was able to write for Progressive Dairy. In that article, I talked about the book Wheel Spin, and I also had the opportunity to hear the author of the book speak at a business conference that I was at. And during his presentation, I really was very inspired by how much of what he was talking about really applied to the decision-making process that a dairy producer goes through in pricing milk and purchasing feed and all the other things that you have to make decisions on, even just in overall management of the operation. And one of the things that came out of that presentation that I thought was kind of interesting was the talk about focusing your decisions and how to narrow your focus on what matters and not be distracted by sort of the noise and what doesn't matter. And the author of Wheel Spin talked about this in his presentation and related to how the military trains fighter pilots. It's just a matter of seconds, like 20 or 30 seconds between the time that a dogfight starts and before one or the other of the fighter pilots wins or loses, and typically loss means death. So it's very, very important that in less than a minute, all of the decisions are made and made very, very quickly and very, very well. And in the military, they've learned how to actually train the fighter pilots, how to focus and not be distracted by sort of external things, such as the opposing pilot making a fake move to the right or to the left, and how to actually sort of look beyond that and see the big picture as to how the fight can unfold going forward. It wasn't said in this book, but I've read it other places. They say seeing the movie reel. In other words, you see the movie play out before you, before it actually occurs. And the more you can do that, the more successful you are in decision making and planning. And how that really applies in the marketing business of buying feed for your dairy or selling your milk is that, and I talked about this in my book, New Times, New Rules for Marketing. There's a chapter in it where I really talk about that normally most markets are driven by one major fundamental factor. And all the other stuff is just kind of noise and a distraction. And if you focus on that one major fundamental factor that is really pushing the market and watch how the market's responding to that, and when it quits responding to it, and when that factor changes, you'll be a much better marketer. For example, a lot of times you hear things about exports, or the strength of the dollar or the weakness of the dollar affecting grain prices. But bottom line is, like this last year, when you have weather concerns and the crop is going to be substantially smaller, it doesn't really matter that much what exports are or what the dollar does relative to the fact that you just wiped a couple billion bushels off the crop. So the major fundamental factor driving that market was the weather and the crop size. And, another time it might be in milk that the major fundamental factor is it doesn't really matter that we have really large supplies. We're just exporting, like crazy. And if exports are really tightening up the overall supply-demand balance, and that's the driving force behind the high milk price, then, it doesn't matter that you have large supplies. And you can get bogged down and watch, if you try to be this econometric model and weigh all the factors that are driving a market, it can drive you nuts. And nobody really is capable of doing that very well at all, because one factor may be a big deal one year and a little factor the next year. And how do you weigh all of these things in any given year, whether they're going to increase the price 2% or 1%, or whether it's going to change it by 3% or 4%? If there's another major factor, such as the weather and the crop market, that's changing the supply-demand balance by 20 or 30%, that's what's driving the market. And the fact that the dollar is weak or strong is just a minor, factor in the big picture of things. But people get really distracted by these things. When we call people with recommendations and advice and we say, oh, we think you ought to be doing X, Y, Z, very, very often they'll come back and say, well, yeah, but the dollar's really strong, so I don't really know if I want to sell corn. And it's like, the crop just came in a billion bushels bigger than you thought it was going to be. The prices are starting to trend down. Doesn't really matter that the dollar's strong. The market's going into the sewer. Get something sold if you're a seller of that commodity. So it's very, very important not to let all the news and all these other fundamental factors out there distract you, and narrow your focus to the one major fundamental factor that's driving the market. And I hope this has been a help to you. Again, this is Scott Stewart from Stewart-Peterson, and good luck in your marketing.